Today on Nova Legends podcast, I have Gary Reedy, one of the first basketball players at George Mason, back then George Mason College. He played at Edison. He later coached with Red Jenkins and Woodson and other great coaches. And then he had a good run himself as head coach at Annandale High School. Thanks for joining me, Coach.
Hey, Julian, good to be here.
Yeah. So, Coach, I don't know if we've ever been formally introduced. I've been in the gym with you. I played against you in '84. The team you had Alex Carnival and Jeff Birch. I was with Bob McKagan and Robinson. But I'm not sure if I've ever talked to you through the years.
No, maybe not. I mean, obviously, I've talked to a number of officials. Sometimes not so good.
Yeah. So maybe it was good that we never were introduced. Huh,
yeah.
Coach?
Yeah, that's okay.
So let's start. I don't know if you heard my interview with Pat Toomey. He's a fellow Edison grad. But one thing he said that surprised me is, we don't think of Edison as being in the country because, I mean, I got here in 72, 73. We settled in Lake Braddock. But ever since I remember, Edison was kind of not in the city, but, almost kind of urban. And, the county was growing around it. But one thing Pat said when he played football, basketball, and ran track, he said that Arlington schools were huge. They're the big schools, Alexandria as well. And Edison was like a country school. It probably changed a little bit when you got there. What's your memories of Edison and the area that fed into Edison?
Well, my parents, I grew up in what was now called Old Town Alexandria. Mm-hmm. Back in the 60s, there was no such thing as Old Town. That was downtown Alexandria. The yuppies made it into Old Town. But anyway, that's where I grew up as a kid, and I would have gone eventually to TC. My parents moved out when I was in fourth grade to Ridgeview, which I lived down about 3 blocks from Pat Toomey. Obviously, I was younger than Pat, much younger than Pat, but he lived in Ridgeview also, which was basically a farm. And to us moving out there, that was the country. And it was all farmland that turned into houses. We had a new house that was built there. But those houses, even back in the day, and then my wife that I've been married to for 44 years, she was in Sunny Ridge. That was there a little before Ridgeview was there. But those were all new houses back in those days. Back in the 60s, those were all new homes. Most of them, no air conditioning. No, we didn't get air conditioning till we lived in the house for like 3 or 4 years. But anyway, those were all cut out of farmland there, and that's why I'm sure Pat said it was like that was being in the country. And then if you went out to Herndon didn't even have a paved road in those days. That was a dirt road to get to Herndon High School. So. And we really didn't even play them. I mean, we didn't even go out to play Herndon.
Coach, was the Beltway built when you guys moved to the?
No, it was being built at that time. But both my parents worked in downtown DC, like everybody in the suburbs. Then they all worked in downtown DC. They both worked at the National Bank of Washington, so they would drive back and forth to work. And nowadays you think that's close, and they thought that was a long ways away.
Well, it was a long way because you probably had to go up Van Dorn Street, or was I'm sure 95 was probably built in. Well, it's 395 now, but you probably go Van Dorn Street.
They went 95 over 14th Street Bridge.
That's right. Okay.
That's how they went to work every day.
Yeah. So how'd you get into sports? And I assume you probably played more than just basketball.
Oh yeah. And when I was younger, I was a better football player and baseball player. Living in Ridgeview, we had the ball fields. You like the movie Sandlot. We had the ball fields across the street on Franconia Road from there. And virtually every day in the summer, everybody played baseball. Julian, back in those days, nobody played soccer. You grew up playing baseball. That's why Americans in the 60s, everybody grew up playing baseball. We played baseball all the time. Then we played football. I didn't even touch a basketball till I got to middle school. Never even knew I'd never played basketball.
Were the Senators still here? I mean, were you guys Orioles fans?
No. We were Senators. Matter of fact, my dad at Old Griffith Stadium, my dad, as a part-time job, and he loved baseball so much, he was a ticket collector.
Wow. Yeah. So you guys, you grew up a baseball fan, and who were your heroes in baseball?
Oh God! Of course, everybody when I was a kid, Frank Howard, and then you had Orioles guys too that you all liked, the Frank Robinsons and Hank Ayers, and back in our day, everybody traded baseball cards.
Yeah.
That was the deal. You got the bubble gum, got your cards, and everybody had shoe boxes full of baseball cards,
Yeah.
and everybody that was their thing that we did.
Yeah.
So.
Were you a good baseball player?
As I said, I was probably a better baseball player and football player. In football, I started both ways, and in baseball, I was a pitcher and played first base. But by my sophomore year, I decided, and I think part of it was the success that Edison had in basketball with Pete DeHaven and Steve Morse and stuff. And they were, grew up down the street too, Pat Toomey. I decided I wanted to go to college to play basketball and not football. Was kind of one time leaning to play football. I stopped playing football and baseball just to play basketball, and all hell broke loose. Bob Carson Bob was our AD then,
yeah.
And Carl was the basketball coach. And when you had, even when in the 80s and 90s, when guys all of a sudden started, even when I was coaching, you had kids who all of a sudden were football players and baseball players, and all of a sudden they just played basketball. It caused a little bit of an uproar sometimes, that, hey, you're the coaches that coach the other sports didn't like that too much, especially if it was a good player who was deciding to do that. Now, in Annandale, wasn't so much. I had a bunch of our good players were all football players, and I never had any issue with that at all. The kids that, I wanted the best athletes, the best players to play, but that was an individual thing that kids had to decide for themselves, because in basketball, if you want to play at the next level, if you don't play 365 all the time, you're not playing at the next level. You can just forget it.
Yeah.
It's not going to happen. And even then, it's become, people don't understand how difficult it's become. It was easier in the 70s and the 80s. Now they don't realize how good you have to be to play basketball at the next level. So.
Yeah, and you really have to be even outstanding athlete to excel in one sport and play three. And I've talked to Todd Kirtley and Mark Cox, and some of the others I've talked to, and they loved playing against everyone in all three sports, because if you lost, if you beat us in football, we're going to get you back on basketball.
Yeah.
But I mean, those days are over.
Yeah. Yeah.
So by your junior year, you were done playing football and baseball?
Yes.
Okay. And who was on Carl Hensley? Who was on his staff? Who were his freshmen and JV coaches?
Doug Green was an assistant coach there. Believe it or not, way back, Bob Carson was an assistant basketball coach.
Okay, yeah. He became
he was an assistant because at that time when they first opened, you got to remember Edison. You got new houses. Edison was a new school.
Yeah.
Edison didn't come along in the 60s when all of us were all moving in too. And then they started building Hayfield.
Yeah. That's right. Hayfield came after us. It's just so funny because when I talk to these coaches, and the coaches always move to the new schools. The idea of Wickline moving to Jefferson and Jefferson being a new school, I just can't imagine. I just can't see Jefferson being a new school. But I guess at some point it was a new school. So,
yeah. Well, I kind of did the same thing when I left Annandale to go to Lake Braddock. But, my deal with Lake Braddock, when I left Edison, I graduated. Carl took the job at Lake Braddock. And that summer when I was transitioning to go play at Mason, I helped them coach their first summer league team. I claimed to some of those guys, I go, to some people, I go, you do know I'm like the first basketball coach at Lake Braddock ever, right? You do know that, right?
Yeah.
So, because I coached kids in summer league that first year when I graduated out of high school, and then even when I came out of Mason after I graduated, I did my student teaching at Lake Braddock with Carl and
Charlie was probably Charlie Thompson was probably
Charlie was there. Charlie was there with Carl, and Bobby Harris was the baseball coach.
Yeah.
And again, Bob Carson was the AD.
Yeah.
And Bob kind of talked me into coming over to Lake Braddock from Annandale, and Bob Hardage was trying to talk me out of it. And the problem I was having, I was building a house that was feeding into Lake Braddock at the time. I was living in Fairfax Station. I built a house in Fairfax Station, and then I was building a house that was feeding into Lake Braddock. So that kind of played into it, and that's kind of what happened. And then as that went on, I'd been at Lake Braddock for 3 years at the time. And then I started building my businesses, and I'd always been entrepreneurial. Even though coaches, I had the first basketball camp at Annandale, and I'd helped run Red's camps all those years when I was with Red at Woodson. And then I opened a golf camp out at International Country Club where I belong. So I had a golf camp going. I had a basketball camp going. I was making a lot of money on the side in the camp business to add to your teaching bit. But that's what teachers and coaches had to do. They still have to do it, but we definitely had to do it back in those days.
Or you can be like Coach Thompson. You can be like Coach Thompson and clean pools, right? So, but let's get back to Edison for a minute. What was it like going to high school? And this is the pre-Watergate days. Vietnam is at the height of the Vietnam War.
Yep.
You're there after the assassinations of Kennedy and King. What was it like? What was it like going to high school at Edison?
I love my days in high school. It was obviously I met my wife. We went to high school together. She was a cheerleader, and we've been married ever since. We got out of college. We went to college together, and it was great. It was a new school. It's one of the things living out in Loudoun County. I hear everything's new. Everything's brand new. You weren't going to an old school. This is a new school. God, I think our graduating class had 600 and some kids in the graduating class. So it was a big graduating class. And as I said, everything was brand new. And back in those days, Joe, we didn't know that we were, if you want to call it poor, we were middle class. We were just middle class. We didn't know. You didn't have air conditioning. You didn't, you just did what you did. You didn't know that a lot of these schools you go to, you got a lot of rich kids. Didn't seem like we had any rich kids at Edison. It didn't seem, everybody seemed the same. It seemed like we all grew kind of in the same neighborhoods, the same houses. Parents had kind of the same jobs. They either worked for the government downtown or worked at businesses downtown. Or a few of them had, like, Joe Alexander had his hardware store there. I don't know if you know who Joe Alexander was, but he was supervisor for the area for a long, long time. Anyway, that was what it was like. And in those days we had a lot of other kids. Every day after school, we played basketball every day. One of my problems academically, my wife was one of the top 3 or 4 kids in the school. She never got a B in her whole life, even in college. My deal was how fast I could get to the practice field or to the gym as soon as school was out each day.
Sounds like you married up.
Yeah. Oh, no question. But she did get me to grind on the books before where I grinded really hard as an athlete. I wouldn't say I was the greatest gifted guy in the world, but I got a really big heart. And I guess one thing as a coach, it was always an issue for me, because when you're the type of athlete that you get by on grit and heart, and it upsets you when you see kids who have huge talent who just don't have the heart. They don't grind at it, so it's just the way I was. I don't know. When you're 6'3" and you're probably, I guess, still one of the top 2 leading rebounders in the school history, and even at Mason, I still think I'm in the top 12. Somehow or another, you got a nose for the ball. You go get it. Even though I was a really good shooter, can shoot outside, I got a lot of points inside too.
Well, Coach, I feel sorry for you being 6'3", but I was only 5'5" in high school, so I would have done anything.
I got you. You're a point guard, but you're quick.
But I had to go against Tommy Amaker, Glenn Williams, Vince Sanovica, Dick Mitras. I mean, I was so many great point guards. I had to Frank Smith. But anyway, let's get back to your
Sure.
your high school career. So what you played for Carl Hensley, a good friend of mine. Derek and I grew up playing travel basketball together. We called it county. So
Yep.
I knew him really well. So how did you meet Coach Hensley? What kind of coach was he? How would you characterize his style?
Oh, it was interesting. I said we played every day. We played every day. Guess who played with us every day? We
Hook.
called him Hooks, and I know you've had to heard this from many of you. We called him Hooks Hensley. He had the hook. That's how he played.
Yeah.
He played every day with us after school, and loved to compete. And he was a little different. And when I compare Carl to Red, really, and then being with Charlie some too, coaching with Charlie, three different type of coaches and the way they approach things and the way they were. I love Carl. It was great playing for Carl then. And like I said, Carson, who was the AD, he would even come out and play with us too. Yeah. Almost every day.
Well, what did you learn from Coach Hensley that influenced your own coaching? Is there anything that when you were coaching that it was something that you did? I think one thing that I've heard from Hensley, he had a very regimented schedule that you knew beforehand. I think that was what Pat Toomey told me. But what did you learn from Coach?
Yeah, it was funny because when you say that Carl's was regimented in time, it was on time. Everything was timed. Time. And he was maybe one of the first ones. You had to be in really great physical shape. We had to qualify running the mile every year. It was the first time doing 10 and 10s every day, sometimes 2 times a day at practice. He wanted you to be in great physical condition, even though he didn't run the ball up and down the court. We did press almost all the time, though, even though we didn't run any per se organized fast break. But he was very regimented in what he did in practice, and he would break things down. Each part of drills, he would take each part of the drill and take each fundamental, and we would work on the fundamental from the drill almost every day. So that's what I would think with Carl and competitiveness. I guess I've been really, really competitive forever, but he drove that competitiveness, no question.
What was the mood like at the gyms? Because in the 70s, early 80s, you go to a game, the gyms were packed.
Yes.
After the games, you go to Pizza Hut, everyone would be there, all the fans would be there. They give the players standing ovation when they walk in. Basketball was king in those days.
No question. Our games, Julian, at our games, if you didn't get there by the JV game, you weren't getting in. It was sold. They were all sold out. They would have windows up at the top of the gym at Edison, and people would go on the roof and try to look in from the windows. Or they'd open the windows to try to look in because the whole place, even the sidelines. Nowadays you wouldn't. The fire marshal would say, "What the hell you do? You can't do this." They literally every time the ball was taken out of bounds, the referee handed you the ball. They had to slide people over to hand it in. That's what it was like. It was so different as it changed over the 80s and 90s. Now it's not nearly what at least in 80s and 90s, the big rivalry ones would get sold out. Now, it's nothing like that. And again, I've been retired now for 12 years and I ain't coached in over 15 years. So, but I've gone to a few games. I went to watch Hayfield this year because I wanted to see them play. I was really, really impressed. Yeah. So, but Red and I would go. We'd been going for years until COVID hit to 5 or 6 games a year. We'd go together to games and stuff to see some. But it was sad. You'd go to some of these games and go over to Lake Braddock and watch a few games, and there wouldn't be 100 people there.
Yeah. It got a little better this year. I think post-COVID, people were in the mood for some local sports. But I agree with you. It's not like when we played. So Edison hit the floor running in terms of basketball. In '65, I believe Pat Toomey's Edison team went to state, and they went again in '66. I think three teams went from Northern Region because all the district winners back then went. But then your freshman year, I believe, Edison went to state again. I think that was
Yeah,
Pete
they won.
DeHaven who ended up
Yeah,
starting
they
it.
won. They won they won the region that year, and I think it's probably one of the big reasons I started committing to just play basketball. You know, it
So
was a really exciting time to get involved and going in the gym every day, and as a young impressionable kid, that really made a big impact on me.
well, as you probably realize, Edison doesn't get its fair run on Nova Legends side. We don't talk about Edison players. Pete DeHaven and Steve Morse. Steve Morse walked on to UVA and was a
Yes.
captain with Coach McKay his senior year. DeHaven and played in American, averaged in double
Yeah.
figures. Played in the old CBA. We called it the Eastern.
Yeah. He played
League.
with Kermit Washington over there with AU. Yeah.
Yeah. So tell us about those two guys. I mean, I've never heard much about Steve Morse. He must have been a heck of a player at 5'11" to play in the ACC, and also Pete DeHaven.
Yeah. Well, those two guys probably influenced me the most about, I mean, just watching them play. And I'm in the gym. I'm the freshman guy, and they're senior guys. So, I'm still not quite ready for prime time, but I'm doing the best that I can. But over the years, now Pete never played with us, but Steve Morse played with us with Mike Wells, about Mike.
Of course, yeah.
And Hubert Davis's dad. We all played in men's league together for about 15 years. We won everything that there was in Alexandria, Fairfax County, Arlington. We all played together. So I really got to know Steve, and his dad was a builder. I got to know Steve a lot more after the fact, after the days. We would go play. His dad would run this golf tournament up in Shenandoah 2 times a year, and we would all go up and play. All the guys, the Edison kind of alumni basketball players, would go up there and play. Now, we haven't done that in 20 years, but we used to do it every year, a couple times a year. But, they were a big influence on me. That, I'm not sure I would have gone that way if those guys in the program hadn't been successful. I'm not, who knows, Julian, maybe I would have gone and played college football or something, who knows? It's just, that movie, Sliding Doors, how one door opens, how it steps in,
How would you compare them to some of the better guards in the Northern region history in terms of how good they were?
Well, Steve was a really, really good guard. He could shoot. And you look in Northern Virginia, some of the point guards who brought him up, Tommy Amaker, Rod Wood is a friend of mine, really good. Niehoff, who played at Mason, Frank Smith, you could
Greg
go.
Williams.
Yeah. Greg Williams. There you go. And obviously Tommy and it's hard to compare 70s players to 80s, 90s, somebody like Scotty Reynolds. There's another one. Yeah. Great point guard. How do you compare some of these guys? Right. But Steve was really, really smart. He was a smart student too. Obviously went to UVA, but he was smart, but he was really smart player. Not the quickest guy. And, he played in the ACC, and if you compare Tommy to Steve, Tommy would run circles probably around Steve. Different era, different time, different type of player. Steve could really score. Tommy didn't look to score that much. Tommy could score, but he didn't look to score that much. Yeah. So
how about Pete? How about Pete DeHaven? He's a guy I had never heard of. I had never heard of him until last year or so.
Yeah. Pete was about as fundamentally sound as you could get. There's a guy, you talk about work at the game. I probably got more from watching him and what he did than anybody else. Pete was I'm going to say Pete was running at about 6'5". And in those days, 6'5", I used to say this. I said, because I played against Adrian Dantley a few times, and Adrian Dantley was 6'5". I would always say, God, if I could just be 6'5" or 6'6", I could go play in the NBA. I could, it's just that 3 inches too short, just. But those were the times you could get away. Those guys now have to be 6'8". It's a different guy. But Pete was that way. Really good rebounder, really good defensive player. That team at Edison had some really hard-nosed kids, really good defensive team. That team and Pete DeHaven was one of those. He could really score. and he wasn't flashy. He would never run his mouth on the bat. Never. I never saw him ever, like chirp at people and stuff like that. I hate to say, Julian, I did that all the time. I didn't get that from Pete. I would chirp a lot.
Yeah.
It's maybe because I grew up in Old Town Alexandria or downtown Alexandria, and even in high school, we would go back and play. I'd play in Alexandria, and I would go play over in Arlington in the summer times, playing on the playgrounds courts. And I don't know, I tended to chirp a lot.
Yeah.
I guess it motivated me to chirp.
Yeah, I always thought he was as a tough guy on the sidelines. So, well, you also witnessed all the transitions that were going on in Alexandria from George Washington, Hammond, and TC Williams. They all combined, and TC became the senior high school.
Right.
And then they moved around a little bit. They'd have freshmen and sophomores at the middle schools at points. It was kind of confusing. But how did that affect the sports when the schools shuffled around? Yeah, what was the process?
It was big time. I was during that time. I remember the Titans. That was what was going on, and they were combining the two schools together, which I can't even imagine. Could you imagine joining together like, I don't know, Robinson Lake Braddock, or how about Herndon and South Lakes, and the athletes that you would have, the players that you would have, putting all the best of the best together like that. It made them athletically, at least for the early years, the early 10 years or so, really made them dominant. I can remember my senior year, us going in against the Turner brothers in there and beating them at TC. But again, gyms packed. And they had to have Alexandria police guarding the locker rooms, guarding everything. The buses, we got the windows rocked out of our bus and stuff. And it was some crazy times during that time. So I wouldn't want to be a referee in that gym at TC Williams in the 70s. I wouldn't want to have been calling a game there.
Yeah. Well, the 1971 George Washington team won the region. Do you have any recollection of that George Washington president's team?
Well, I remember them losing. GW lost to Edison in the finals of the region in, was that 70, I guess?
70. That's Herb. That's your future teammate, Herb Estes, right?
Herb Estes, yes.
Yeah.
And then the next year, GW won the region. So, and that's when after that, that's when they started combining the schools. I guess it was 72 when they started combining the schools. But GW was a dominant team. GW, I tell you who else? West Springfield. McCool was at West Springfield, and that year that Edison won, they had the two big kids that were really good players that played at West Springfield. And I can't remember their names now off the top of my head, but I think I've said in your thing that the West Springfield 1973 team might be one of the best high school teams I've ever seen. And I've been here my whole life. So,
and that was Kester's probably junior year or sophomore?
Junior year, his junior year. Yeah. They had six kids on that team that were college basketball / baseball players on one team.
In one team, yeah. And how did Edison do against those Springfield teams?
It happened to come at the wrong time. We were in their district and we had to play against them. That was like our big thing, to play against West Springfield. But we were just not, just good enough to get past those guys. And we lost one of our other best players about 7 or 8 games into the season, Ronnie Truitt, who broke his collarbone. And he was like an all-Met football player, but he was a really good basketball player too. Broke his collarbone. And we needed him. I mean, I would felt like I was playing against, Tierden and Ferris and Watney and all those guys. Every time I took a dribble, they're bringing 2 and 3 at me every time. And they were big. I mean, for back then, 6'6" guys were pretty big size kids that you were playing against. So anyway, a really good team, obviously good shooters. They had Steve Bacon, who played with us at Mason for part of the time there. played, he was one of the guards on that team. And I've told him all along that I always thought that was, and maybe I was biased because they could kick our ass all the time, that, I thought they were one of the best teams ever in Northern Virginia.
And that was before Lake Braddock was built. Robinson was just being built when you were in high school. So West Springfield, it must have been another country school, by the way, but it must have been a pretty big school back then.
Oh yeah. Well, you got to figure West Springfield had all those kids. West Springfield had, that was like the new school area. That was where, and the people were moving out there. As you know, that's where you moved to,
Yeah.
Area was all brand new. Everything out there was all brand new. Lake Braddock was being built. They opened up, I guess they only had sophomores 74, maybe, I think is when they opened. And Robinson was already open.
Yeah.
But what was always interesting, Julian, is you had the two largest schools in the state of Virginia, and you could almost spit on them. They were that close. Does that tell you anything about the population out there?
You talking about Lake Braddock and Robinson?
Yeah.
So how about your own career? How many did you average? I know you ended up going to Mason. Did you get any postseason accolades?
I played in what was the very first Capital Classic All-Star game.
Wow, that's awesome.
I was all region, and I averaged about 18 and 10. At Mason, I started 3 of the 4 in my sophomore year. That was a crazy year at Mason. I almost transferred out of there at the time. They brought in a lot of players who ended up couldn't play and couldn't stay in school. And then I started my junior and senior year. And my senior year, I made all conference out at Mason. And and then I came right out of school and started coaching and teaching right away. And back in those days, it was really hard, Julian, to get a teaching and coaching job. Really hard. Probably 3/4 of my class that I went to at Mason did not come out getting a teaching and coaching job. Now they're begging. I mean, it's only going to get worse in teaching and coaching, but now they're begging them and they can't get them. But back then it was really, you had to, and it's one of the reasons I chose George Mason. I'd gotten recruited by Roanoke, who had the year before had just won the national championship in Division II. And I went, places we went to visit. And back in those days down in Roanoke, there was one stoplight in the town. That didn't hit it. And in Tech had recruited me. And then Madison, I almost went to Madison. Madison had just changed about 2 years earlier from an all-girls school. And probably the biggest reason I didn't go is because now my wife, who is basically the smartest person in the room when you walk in the room, they had cut off all admissions to women there. And they couldn't get her in. And I'd said, this was, late March or whatever, for I was making a commitment, and I was going to go there, and they said they couldn't get her in school. I said, they say, well, we can get her in next semester, but we can't get her in for the start of the school year because they've cut off all female acceptance, and that's when I decided to go to Mason and stay local. And I knew I was going to teach and coach. And so it was, kind of a situation where I could stay locally, keep contacts locally. As I said, it was really hard getting teaching and coaching jobs in those days. So it worked out great for me. I mean, in those days, Julian, we did not have dorms at Mason. So they had to pay for us to stay off campus. We're on scholarship and they're paying for us to stay off campus. They're giving us intramural money. They're giving us, I never had by my sophomore year, I was driving a brand new Corvette. I mean, nowadays the NCAAs would go crazy what was going on. My girlfriend / wife was running a tutorial program for the university. She was getting paid. Every spring break, we were going to the Bahamas. We came out of college, got married. We were able to put a down payment on a townhouse where these kids are coming out now with $150,000 in debt. We've never had so much money. So it worked out great for me. It's probably the best thing that ever happened. So
Mason was Division II back then?
It was Division II and it was rolling over to Division I just at that time. 77, 70, we're just rolling over. couple years later, then they hired Joe Harrington, and Rick Barnes was his assistant. So Red had his camp at Mason. He had his camp at Mason. And so when Joe came in and took the job there, Red owned the camp. So Joe, the university eventually had to buy Red out of his basketball camp. But for a couple years there, you know, I was helping run a basketball camp there. You know, Joe, and that's how I got to know Joe really well and Rick really well. And eventually, you know, the camp got turned over to them. Red made some, and he just ran his camp out of Woodson. So that's kind of how all that evolved.
Yeah. Well, you know, it was a beautiful area over there, but it wasn't very developed back then. So what was the campus life like at George Mason? I guess it was still George Mason College.
Yeah. Well, no, it was university when I went there. It had changed college back in, I want to say 70, 71. It was a branch of UVA back in the 60s. And then it changed over to university in like, I want to say 70, 71. And yeah, again, everything was brand new. So all the buildings and stuff they were all brand new, except for if you took your anatomy and kinesiology, and we had to be in the pre-med stuff. They held at the North Campus, which was Old Fairfax High School. And if you've been down there lately, I was just there, Julian, about a week ago. They've toured. It's all, you know, $1 million plus townhouses now there, all condos and stuff. I don't know if you've been over there recently. So the Old Fairfax High School, they've kept a little bit of the skeleton of the school. I don't know what they're doing with it. I don't know why they haven't bulldozed the whole thing down, but it's almost like they're keeping it around as a shrine or something. I don't know, because it's obviously one of the oldest schools ever in Fairfax County. Might be the oldest. I don't even know. It could be the oldest. But anyway, we had to take kinesiology and anatomy there. We used to dissect cadavers there, and across the street was the Shakey's Pizza place.
Yeah, that was great.
We'd come out with formaldehyde smelling on our fingers and go across the street and eat sausage pizza over Shakey's.
Tuesday nights, all you can eat, and you have those potato spuds that were so good there. Yeah. So who was the basketball coach at George Mason?
John Lynn was the basketball coach when I was there, and like I said, right after that, Joe Harrington came in, and Rick was his assistant.
What'd you learn from John? What'd you learn from John Lynn?
Oh, well, remember I told you we ran a lot with Carl? John Lynn was a cross country guy. We ran cross country. We never ran so much in our life, and. As far as an X and O's and a basketball guy, you know, John Lynn was a really nice guy, but his knowledge, and compared to the 3 high school coaches I just named, we talked about, not quite at their level as far as X's and O's and execution and stuff like that. So it was a little different atmosphere. You know, like I said, I had a chance to go a couple other places and I didn't. And I didn't choose to go there because of John Lynn. I played for John, and he was a nice guy. And, you know, the university had to move on away from that because John was not what you would call a professional college coach. He just wasn't at that level.
And Harrington took the job from Lynn. Is that okay? That was probably 79 or so because Harrington was at Hofstra, I believe, one year.
I'm going to say 78 or 79, somewhere in there was when that. Yeah, it was 79, I guess. It was like 2 years after because I graduated in 77, so I think it was like 2 years later that Joe took it.
And where did you guys play your games when you played? Was it at the PE building, or did you guys play somewhere else?
That was the gym. There was the Patriot Center, was not built. That was our gym. That's where we practiced and played all of our games and stuff there. And before that, when those guys were playing in the 60s, they played a lot of games at Woodson back in the 60s. Because the Michaels brothers that played for Red, they were one of the first couple in Northern Virginia. They played over there and they played their games. They didn't have any gym. So
How did you get along with your old rivals like Herb Estes and the other players that you had competed against in high school?
Well, Herb was always ultra competitive like me. So we knocked our heads a lot in practice in games, or not games, but practice. And Herb was a really good player. Herb was probably had the quickest release of any human I've ever seen. He could get a shot off. And again, Herb was only about 6'3" or 6'4", could rebound like hell, could get up as quick as any person I've ever seen. But you know, we played together, but we knocked heads together too. So it was a competitive atmosphere in practice. Let's put it that way.
Yeah. Who are some of your other top teammates?
Carl Jackson came. Carl came from over there.
McAdoo.
Levester Berry. Myron Conti was a great guard. I mean, Myron had the ability. If Myron could shoot at all, he could have played in the NBA. Wow. The guy in practice, I just tell him, get away from me. I didn't want him guarding me. I didn't want him near me. It's like the guy was just awesome. He had the longest arms and fingers. One of the things about Tommy, really long fingers, as you know, to pluck you in a heartbeat. But Myron could jump. Myron was probably about 5'9", 5'10", tops. He could put his head to the top of the gym and a rim. And part of the deal was it was almost like he could hang in air forever. It was amazing. Great passer. Oh, he could pass the ball. Great passer. The guy, like I said, that the guy could, you know, most of the teams were playing, they would just back completely off of it because they knew, you know, he wasn't going to shoot and he couldn't really shoot very well. We had plenty of other guys could shoot. Levester Berry was a great shooter. And those guys all played over at GW. They were all GW players. Carl, they played at TC. All really good players. All really, really good players.
And who would you guys play back then? This is before Mason was in the ECAC South. So what conference were you guys in, and what kind of teams?
We were playing UMBC, Towson,
Randolph-Macon.
What was the other school? Hampton. We were playing the one where Ed Tiernan went. I'm trying to think of the name of the school. It's like
geez,
boggling my mind down on 95. Hampton Sydney. We would play a couple of schools over West Virginia, Charleston,
Shepherd.
So that was kind of the league during that time for the CAA formed.
How many did you average in high school? You said you started all 3 years. Did you win league honors?
You say in high school or college?
No, in college. You said you started 3 years.
In college, my senior year, I made what was all league then. In my senior year, I was captain of the team my junior and senior year. Like I said, my sophomore year was a really I played a fair amount as a freshman. My sophomore year was a really kind of transitional year. Like I said, I thought about transferring at the time because things had gotten kind of crazy there. And Carl talked me into staying. You know, I stayed and just kind of fought through it, and it worked out great that I did. So
it usually does if you stay and gut things out. So tell us about how you got into coaching. I know by the time I was playing basketball in the early 80s, you were Red's chief lieutenant, but I guess you must have gone to Lake Braddock first, it sounds like. So tell us about your coaching journey, and they got you to Woodson.
Well, my very first coaching job out of college was I was the freshman coach at West Springfield. And the next year, Red used to announce our games because I didn't know Red that much other than we had played Woodson, but I didn't really know him that well. He would do the announcing on the radio for our games at George Mason. So he got me to come over with him the next year. So literally was only 1 year out of college. And then I spent the next, whatever it was, I guess 5 or 6 years before I took that Annandale job with Red over there. And And then after that, I took the Annandale job, and I had been at Annandale for 5 years. And then the Lake Braddock opportunity came. I wasn't really looking at moving. We'd had some really good success in Annandale, had some really good teams, and I had a good team that was coming back on top of the. Yeah, we lost to Charlie's team in the regionals, and Charlie's team went on to win the state, and we should have won the game. We missed 2 front ends and one-on-ones in the last minute of the game and lost the game by 2 points, and we really should have won the game. It was a great game. We had a great team. Loved our kids, and we had a lot of good players coming back in Annandale too. And the opportunity at Lake Braddock came along, and I thought about it for many weeks before I'd made the decision to change over. But it was, again, that thing we're talking about, sliding doors, how life would have changed if you'd have stayed in Annandale, not gone to Lake Braddock. If I hadn't gone to Lake Braddock, I wouldn't have developed and opened all the businesses I have over the years, and done all the entrepreneurial side of things, where I kind of got completely out of coaching. And I would always get involved with Red a little bit here and there, even though I was, building my businesses and stuff. And I'd gotten out of teaching and coaching completely. I'd left, and I only came back in right after 9/11. I came back because my accountant had said I had a partner for some of the things that I did, and we had a split up after I built a water park out on Route 28, water park and go-karts and roller skating rink out on Route 28. And we had a partnership out there that was not going well. So I ended up selling the whole thing off to some of the Redskin guys, Charles Mann and those guys, for their church, Grace Church, which is now Grace Church. But for a long while, they ran the water park till they just found out it was too hard for those guys to do it. And they ended up, I broke my heart when they bulldozed the water park down, and they bulldozed the go-karts down, which getting approval for those things back in those days were really, really difficult. And luckily I knew enough people in the county, I could get it done. But anyway, I built businesses. My first business was Centerville Mini Golf and Games. I bought a plot of land from Milt Peterson out in Centerville, where the movie theater was, the multiplex, when that was all brand new. It was first multiplex in the area. I bought a piece of land right there. It was just really going to build like an ice cream stand, frozen custard stand with a miniature golf course. That's all I was going to do. It was kind of to hold the land for it to develop, and then sell the land 5 to 10 years down the road, make some money. Well, I'd gone to some trade shows and stuff, Julian, and I said, "Oh crap, you're probably still maybe too young for that." But Discovery Zone, if you knew what Discovery Zone was, with the big playgrounds, used playgrounds. I don't know if you grew up during that time or not.
Yeah, sure.
Laser tag. I brought the first laser tags out of Washington metropolitan area. I put laser tag in a number of facilities I built. So I had that there. The building got bigger and bigger. I put big, huge playground in, laser tag games and all that stuff. This is my first business I built. And my neighbor owned a bunch of Burger Kings, and he said, "Oh, let's open some of these things up, these family entertainment things up with some of my Burger Kings." So that's how we got started. Like the Planet Play that was in Burke. It was Planet Play in Springfield Mall, like the Carousel that was in Springfield Mall, the big 4-level playground. I don't know what your age is to that, if you were around during that time.
Yeah, I was around.
I had Planet Play in the mall there. And when I broke up the biz sold some, I kept the Planet Play that was in the mall. And all the other ones I just broke up, and my partner took some, we sold some, but I kept the Planet Play in the mall. And so I went back to teach school and get my retirement. The reason I went back was to get my retirement, because and it's worked out great. I'm glad I did. I need 7 years to get my retirement. So I went back, and that way also let me coach my son and take my son to school with me. And I went down with Charlie. Charlie offered me a job, and I went down and just worked with Charlie down at Hayfield, took my son down there, and I was living up in Burke. But down at Hayfield, I was right down the street from the Planet Play was Springfield Mall. So it worked out great. I had my business down the street. I was down at Hayfield in the school, and I lived up in Burke. So that's how I spent my last part before I retired completely. And when I retired completely, I built a business out in Loudon. That's why we ended up moving to Loudon. I've been in Fairfax County my whole life. We moved out in Loudon. I built a place called Kingpins, which was a upscale bowling, if you're familiar with Lucky Strike and some of those places like that. Bolero. Matter of fact, I ended up selling it to Bolero years down the road. I opened Kingpins out in Leesburg, and that was my, oh, I shouldn't say it's my last, it really was my last entertainment business. How about that? And my wife and I ran that for many years. And this last one, when I sold it off to Bolero, and thank God I didn't have it during COVID, or shoot, the bowling guys all went under. Bolero is the largest owner of bowling facilities and entertainment facilities in the world, and they can withstand COVID. I took the money, so it was, you protected against taxes. I opened up a little breakfast lunch place called Famous Toastery in Reston, and that really was my last business. I brought some guys in to run the place and be my head chef and stuff in there. And we were there for about a year and a half before COVID hit. And the landlord, and that's the way it has worked with COVID. I had PPP money and EIDL money and stuff like that sitting there. The landlord didn't want to negotiate it. He didn't want to take a haircut at all. And I just said, here are the keys. And I sent all the PPP and EIDL money, and that was the end of it. And now my wife and I are permanently retired. We have our Social Security. She has a World Bank retirement, and I have a county and state retirement and our Social Security, and we're good to go. Yeah. All I do is watch a little basketball here and there.
Yeah. So. Congratulations, coach. Well, let's talk about some of the coaches that you work for. What was it like to be a Red's assistant coach? Now, Red's a very organized coach. His teams run a very structured sideline break. He's an entertainer on the sidelines. It must have been good. It must have been good times being Red's assistant.
I love Red. I look as Red as kind of my second father. I love Red. Red and I still stay very, very close now. And he was, as I tell other people, he could get your mother open for a shot. Offensively, nobody better. Nobody. He loved to press, loved to run sideline, quick break, loved to run stuff off of that stuff. Really organized. Defensively, run a lot of multiples. He would let me, he gave me free rein with some of the defensive things that I had learned over the years to put in some things that he hadn't done before. And, kind of back in the day where nobody even knew what the matchup zone was, we started using matchup zone a lot and doing some things to hide people in the matchup zone where you could really end up playing man for man out of the matchup, and just doing some things like that, trapping off of certain passes, certain number of passes, certain places where the ball would go, we would run off and trap and do some things that people just weren't prepared for back in those times. And I'd say they're not prepared for it. Now, when I watch people play now, I go, I'm surprised. One of the first things we did, Julie, everybody liked to run motion offense. Everybody wanted to run motion offense. I said, how come these people are just not locking the ball down on the left-hand side of the floor and don't let it come back to the point? Don't let it come back to the middle of the floor. It's just crazy, because if you do that, the motion stops. You can't, if you don't let the ball reverse floor, it doesn't, you can't run your offense. And so we would fight to do that, lock it on the side of the floor. And we would call, when you threw it back to the middle of the floor, you're back in neutral, and you would try to influence the ball back to the left-hand side of the floor. You see the great college coaches like Krzyzewski and stuff, and Tommy still does it. And we argue with him about it all the time. They'll push the ball down on the right baseline in the left baseline. We were always of the thought with, I don't want that guy going with his right hand down there and looking back across the floor with his strong hand where he can pass the ball. I'd rather him be running down there with his left hand, where it makes it a lot harder for him to reach back and pass it across the floor. A lot of these guys, down at UVA, they use the pack line defense where they come post to double the post, and a lot of teams, I think over the last couple of years, they've adjusted some to it, how to beat that post to post double. But, things like that. Red was very, very knowledgeable, very knowledgeable. And Charlie was a much more conservative coach.
Yeah.
Charlie could, take kids that maybe weren't as, great talent and get every drop out of them. With what, and again, Charlie was very creative on offense, very creative with the things he would do on offense, and the way he taught defense was a little bit different than I was used to. But every coach has his way, a way he likes to teach things and stuff. So again, the three coaches that I was involved in my life, you couldn't have had better coaches, better knowledge, better with kids. Red, here's another thing with Red. He would even help other coaches get their kids in college.
Yeah, he was. It was great.
Red's biggest point of his life was to help kids get in school, get to school, play in school if they wanted to go to school. But it was one of the biggest things I wanted to do as a high school coach, was help my kids get into the school they wanted to go to. And if they wanted to play, get them to where they could play. I hate to say some high school kids or some high school coaches that just, I didn't see that everywhere. I didn't see that from all the coaches, but that should be the whole purpose of the kids are playing for you, is helping them go to the next level to play. And even if they weren't going to play, get them in school.
What about, so you took the helm at Annandale and eventually Lake Braddock. Do you enjoy more being the top assistant on a top program where you have more time for everything else in life, and you don't have to deal with parents as much and all the other politics that you have when you're a head coach? Or did you enjoy the process at Annandale, especially the excitement when Jefferson closed and those kids like Ray Crittenden, amazing athlete, came and joined you? Which did you prefer?
Oh, I would think anybody would say they want to run their own program. You always want to run your own program. So, there goes, there just shows you another, you want to run your own program, just like with your businesses. You want to run your own business. You want to be, I think at one time, Julian, I had over 100 people that work for me. So it's a big difference, running all this stuff yourself. You make the decisions, you live and die on your decisions. But you have to go through the growing process. With Red, I learned a ton. I learned obviously a ton from Carl. In college, I won't say I learned from experiences. I learned from obviously what we did at Mason, but also when we played against other, I tell you, we played Mount St. Mary's. The guy that was a coach at Mount St. Mary's was probably as good as it gets up there. You learned from all those experiences, and you learn from, like I said, with Red, I couldn't have been in a better environment to learn, but you always want it to be your program. Only reason I did it when I came back after I left Lake Braddock was, one, I wanted to be around Red. I enjoyed that, and I enjoyed being around, the kids and in basketball and stuff. And with Charlie, I was coming back to teach and stuff, and my intention was to take another head coaching job probably during that time. And I had been offered the job at Oakton about 2 years before I was ready to retire. And I sat down with a couple different coaches and talked to them, and before I made a decision not to take the job. I think Oakton it was really having issues with the parents there. They wanted an older, experienced coach like myself to come in and try to deal with those issues. And that is, nowadays, Julian, I could not do this. These parents, the way these parents are and the way things are at schools, I'm a dinosaur, man. I could not do it. I could not, I couldn't do it. I used to, when you had a conflict with a parent, you bring them in and go, it was always about playing time. Everybody was in, but my deal was when I met with the parents, playing time's non-negotiable. It's non-negotiable. That's the way it is. And nowadays, you see a lot of things with these parents and these coaches. You just saw what happened over at Edison, right, with the girls coach over there. You know,
Yes.
so
Do you, do you have,
I don't think I could do it anymore, Julian.
do you have an opinion on what happened to Edison? Do you have any insight on what's going on?
I only know what I've seen, I guess, in the papers and some rumor, because I'm not, I'm not familiar with Edison anymore. I did get put in the Hall of Fame down there 2 years ago, and that was probably the one of the highlights of my life was you grew up there, and it was one of the best things that's ever happened to me. But I don't know everything that was going on. I know she's been there for a long time and had a lot of success. And a lot of times when you're involved in the AAU stuff and AAU players and players moving around, Red went through that a lot too. They always accused him of recruiting. And I said, let me tell you something. He didn't recruit crap. These parents would call him relentlessly wanting to bring their kids there. I can't even I tell the story sometimes about Billy King. Billy King wanted to come play with Tommy. Can you imagine Billy King being in that team with Tommy? Red had to do everything, bend over backwards so that Billy wouldn't come. Yeah. And I think something similar over with Diane Lewis over there was, maybe had issues about players who were coming from different areas or whatever. And what happens is some parents get upset when their kid doesn't get to play anymore because an outside person came in and gets their playing time. Yeah. I don't hold me to that because I don't know exactly. But when somebody's had the success that she's had, I think there's something similar to that. I would think Julian was the cause.
Gosh, you seem like such a great lady too. So, yeah. Well, Coach, last question. I know you're a big fan of George Mason basketball. What are your thoughts about Coach Kim English, and what do you think the prospects for next year and the future?
Well, I always, would love to see George Mason get back to the final. That was probably, I'd love Larry Nega. He was my man. I loved him. And I would always love to see them get back to that. I just know it's difficult. Recruiting. I would still, and I guess because I'm biased to this area, I would have one of my assistants do nothing but get me one or two guys out of the metropolitan area every year. I would be digging all the way back to some of these freshmen and sophomores in high school and be on those guys. I'd have a library of names with coaches that could get me on these guys so I could get a couple years into them. But I got to get me a couple of the best players out of this area and just not let them get away all the time. Plus it's difficult when you're putting guys on the road. Recruiting all the time takes a big chunk of your budget, but you don't, you really need to get one or two of these guys out of this area. And I think they have gotten some. They have gotten some of them out of this area. And Mason's a good place to play. Really, I mean, if, the dorms over there, it's a beautiful campus. Things are beautiful. The Patriot Center is beautiful. But you're still not going to get, one of the top 30, 40, 50 players in the country usually come into Mason. You have to win. And that's why I said, you guys don't realize when you're at a Division I school, it's kind of a little bit, you better be able to coach. It's not just a recruiting thing because you're not going to recruit the best players anymore. You better be able to coach. If you can't coach, then just forget it. Don't bring a guy in if he's not really a good X and O's guy. Yeah. So,
yeah. Well, Coach, this has been great. I've really enjoyed getting to know you on the group. You're always a guy I admire from afar because you're a very intense dude, always into the game. So I always used to like competing against you. You never gave me that hard a time as when I was refereeing. I always thought you're pretty decent. Maybe because you figured I used to play, so you were nice to me. But it's been good.
Julian, I used to say this about officials. I used to say there ought to be a rule as you can't be an official unless you've played, because you don't understand how players can get away with things on the floor that are fouls or not fouls if you haven't played. You just don't. That's one of the things I get some of these officials that would come in, and they were tactically, they knew all the rules tactically, but they didn't understand advantage, disadvantage. So you know that as playing as a point guard too. Some of the things that Tommy Amaker could do to you that maybe some officials might not let get away and some might.
Exactly.
That's kind of the way it is. But hey, officials are like the other. They're probably having a hell of a time keeping officials and getting officials nowadays.
It is in all sports. And Tommy didn't need any tricks against me. He had me well covered throughout. So, yeah. So
Yeah.
Anyway, Coach, let's try to catch a game maybe next year or something. And love to see you in person. But I really enjoyed this. It was great. I haven't really talked to anyone who was there at the George Mason early days. And you had a great coaching career yourself. You've been around a lot of other great coaches. So it was good to talk about all those old times with you. And again, I don't think we don't give Edison enough run on the group. So Edison had a fine basketball and also sports tradition generally.
Right. Yeah. Edison was, like I said, back in the 70s, Edison was a big deal. Just think over the years, because it got to be a smaller school, it got smaller and smaller, became more difficult for them there. So,
right. Well, anyway, Coach, this has been great. I really appreciate you taking time, and we'll definitely have to catch a game together this year.
All right, Julian, I look forward to it.
Yeah. All right, Coach. Thanks again, buddy.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
All right, you're welcome.